In Diablo 2, there are meta builds for each class, designed for everything from farming and rushing to PvP and Ubers. One thing that doesn't get talked about much are the off-meta builds, the ones that you build just for going through areas in a fun way. So today we're going to take a look at a Sorceress build that puts 0 points into Strength, 0 points into Dexterity, and still deals over 20,000 damage in melee, with a significant portion of that being physical damage, and it survives like a champ. Unlike most of our other guides, this is a post-game build and based on a 0 strength challenge, so a lot of the optimal gear will be things you likely won't find in solo self-found, or on a single playthrough. Nor are there really great equivalents for that type of play, though many pieces of information here can be moved over to a more standard, properly statted melee sorceress. Moving down the list of things this build uses, we might as well get the stats out of the way since they're quick and easy. We put everything into Vitality since we're not allowed to put points into any of the other stats except maybe Energy, but I wasn't feeling like doing an Energy Shield build, especially since as of the writing of this, mana burn is still bugged. So how do we get the stats for our gear, you might ask? Well, most of it's going to be from gear, so we need to start with things like charms and jewelry. In terms of the charms, you can go large charms with plus stats because they're the most efficient of the normal charms you can get, or you can go full ham like we have here and get a Nihilus and Hellfire Torch to get those base stats alive and kicking. We also are using jewelry, mostly for strength bumps, but they are nice for dexterity as well, and the use of Ravenfrost helps out a ton with Cannot Be Frozen. By going this route, you still have most of your charms left over to cover gaps in either attack rating or resist, or both, depending on what you're lacking, and by using charms, you do also free up the ring and amulet slots for Angelic Ring and Amulet should you need bigger attack rating boosts to hit enemies. For this character, I skipped those because I'm high enough level, but it's not a bad option, and it will help against bosses. The next question after stats is probably what gear can we equip with such limited stats? Well, first off, we have the cornerstone of this build, and that is the ethereal Breath of the Dying Archon Staff. Why do we choose a staff for this? Despite the exceptionally low strength requirements, the Archon Staff averages around the same damage as the Elite Ogre Maul, swings at the same speed, and even, unfortunately, has the same value 1 range adder, meaning it's basically a super light Ogre Maul. When ethereal, it drops to 20 strength requirement, and with Breath of the Dying, we drop that down even further to an 18 strength requirement, meaning we just need to find 8 strength on the Sorceress to equip it, and it will add another 30 strength to the and dexterity to the pool. Now, being a Sorceress, we do want to consider our elemental damage since we can ramp it up significantly with the right gear. In this case, we are using a Dream Diadem with 0 strength requirement, which fits into our theme quite well. It packs a level 15 Confuse for some protection purposes and gives us a nice bump in the lightning damage to our melee attacks, even though it's not necessarily going to be near as much as a Dual Dream user. This Confuse, though, does help our survivability so much. In the armor slot, for me, it pretty much came down to 3 options. Treachery for fade and increased attack speed, Chains of Honor for big resists and plus skills, as well as a bit of damage reduction, and Fortitude to give us a bit of physical damage bump. Since we don't have many boosts elsewhere, it's going to be fairly significant for our physical damage, and we also get a bit of faster cast from it. For this demonstration, I am using Fortitude because, well, I wanted to tack on additional about 2,000 physical damage per hit to take advantage of Leech, as well as with other gear reach a 10-frame teleport. If you want to lean more into elemental damage, then Chains of Honor would be amazing, and generally Treachery is just the more economy option in this build's case. In the glove slot, since we have a Faith Mercenary, which we'll get into in a bit, I don't need additional attack speed off weapon to hit the 9-frame limit on my attacks, so instead I opted for giving my fire skills a little bit of a boost, since we'll of course be using Enchant to boost our attack rating and damage. This means Mage Fist is the pick I made for this. It also gives us a pinch of faster cast, which lets me reach that target of a 10-frame cast rate for teleport as well, thanks to, well, the Fortitude that we mentioned earlier being alongside it. This leaves us with 2 slots, belts and boots. There's a lot of options here, but since I was lacking physical damage reduction, String of Ears seemed like a safe pick, especially combined with Life Leech since we'll be doing a bit under 4,000 physical damage. There are other options, and depending on what other gear you have, you can have fun with those as well, since if you've leaned into elemental instead of physical, it does open up other damage reducing or even elemental absorbing options for the belt slot. In the boots, I basically chose Gore Riders to give us a little help on bosses, since act bosses are one area where this build struggles if you're being stubborn and do not want to use static, just kind of stick with the theme, though static does help out a ton. Mainly, I just wanted faster run walk, crushing blow, and bleed, but Deadly Strike is nice with our damage as well because, well, it amplifies that amount. If you're leaning into Elemental, you may want to shift either towards Resistance Boots to free up even more charm space for attack rating or Magic Find if you really wanted to, or lean into Elemental Damage Boots, usually fire to punch a bit harder. As far as the Mercenary, the Act 1 Mercenary was the top choice here, with Cold being the chosen element for me, just for a little bit more control of enemies. Though the reason for the Rogue is pretty much for attack speed, thanks to the Faith Bow being an option and the fanaticism it provides punching us up to the fastest attack speed with our weapon. It works out great. As far as armor, I went ahead and threw another Fortitude on her, though Treachery would be pretty solid as well, though ideally she wouldn't trigger it very often, so you may kind of want to balance those out depending on what you want for her. And in the helmet slot, we did want a little more increase in attack speed, so I went with a 2 attack speed jewels in a giant skull, giving our rogue some knockback and crushing blow to let her be semi-helpful even on the damage and control front outside of her normal skills. Though, speaking of skills, thankfully ours are pretty simple, with the most obvious being max enchant, warmth, and fire mastery to really help out our natural fire damage, as well as max lightning mastery to help with our lightning damage from Dream. The other reason we go with enchant is because we actually do want to hit stuff. Personally, I went with the 1-point wonders in the lightning tree as well, since static is just good, and since we've hit the 10 frame cast, teleport becomes fairly safe and reliable to use. Finally, as our last pick of skills, it's pretty much just choose your cold armor. In this case, I did chilling armor since we don't have any range outside of our rogue, though you could go for any of the 3 depending on where you want to go with it, since this won't trigger in cows, for example. Since I have points to spare, I did throw 1 into Cold Mastery 2 to lower enemy cold resist, which in turn does increase the chill duration of the various armors that you use, so I would recommend at least 1 point in this just for, fun's sake, especially if you decide to stack on some cold damage, which is an option for elemental damage. It's just not as easily amplified as the, other 2 options, lightning and fire. So, do you enjoy challenge builds? Do you prefer things a bit more mainstream? Or do you just want help with a build you're working on, whether that's normal, weird, or a challenge? Mention it down below and I'll take a look at it. And as always, a special thanks to the patrons, members, and viewers who make this content possible.